Yeah. Okay, guys. Here we are in the second day of the session for Angular Essentials for Beginner. I would like to do some of the recap what we did last day. We completed couple of topics in the last day which were related to forms. So these were the major topics we were discussing yesterday. So the basics we have completed, components and templating. So a little bit fast, I would like to recap everything. So in basics, we did the information related to how to install everything which is required for an Angular application, how to set up a new project, and how to serve that project on your local browser to see how it is working. So usually that local browser is localhost 4200. That is the default one. So these are the setup commands which we ran, and we were successfully able to run a Hello Angular application on our machine. And the ng-serve was the command which we had used to run and initialize our application after creating it. Usually, as I said, the only thing which you have to work on is the app folder, where your components, where your directives, where your files, everything which is related to your application which you have developed will be inside the app folder, and you have to more or less work on this folder. These were the things which we have, which are the main entities in Angular application, and this is what you are going to develop in your application. This was the overview where most of the important part were data binding stuff, and the three major entities were view, model, and controller. So Angular is binding all these things by using two-way data binding that we'll see in today's lecture. So regarding components, I have told you the component is nothing but the just a UI block, but it is the major block which deals with all the things which you are seeing on the UI. So whatever you see on the UI is made up of some kind of a component which is reusable component, or which can be a specific functionality component. So we discussed about the hierarchy of the components, also how you can create your components and how you can divide your functionality, so that some of the components can be shareable, some of the components can be featured components. Each component will have n number of different components inside it, so it's creating a major component of itself. What all things are there inside component? There are templates, there are classes, there are functionality files, there are metadata files, and the main responsibility of the component was to render the UI on your screen. This was the command, the generate command was there, which is provided by Angular CLI to generate the component by using CLI. The benefit by of using this CLI command instead of manually creating a component was it automatically registers your component in the module file which you are using. If you are not creating by using this command, you have to manually go and register your component in any of the module. The main point which we saw here was every component which you're creating has to be registered in one or other module. Unless and until it is not registered, Angular will not know that your component is present in the application, and it is not going to get rendered properly. So the main point was to register your the component in any of the module. The second thing important was you do not have to register component in multiple modules. If you are doing that, the Angular will tell you a warning that this module was already being registered, and you cannot register it twice in the modules. So you have to be sure about registering the component in any one of the module itself. And then we saw about the templating, how the main point was component is dealing with the UI part of the application, and how that component works by using templates. So there is a template associated with a component, and that template takes cares of showing the UI whatever you see on on the browser. So there are four things by which you can use the template for dynamic creation of your UI. Static creation is not the problem. You just have to render your HTML inside your HTML file, and that way, whenever you are using that component in any of the file or any of the component, it will automatically get rendered. But the actual scenario, in the actual case scenario, what we really need is a dynamic creation of the template. How we are dynamically binding the data from component to your HTML, how you are passing the data, So those all things are related to Angular and your component part. So the way we deal with that is by using data binding. So there are four types of data binding, how you can pass your data from one place to another, from component to your HTML. There are four things which we saw: interpolation, property binding, event binding, and two-way data binding. In this we have covered three things. What is interpolation binding? In the interpolation binding, you are just binding your variable, a string variable, in your HTML by using two curly braces which are shown in the example. So in this way, whatever variables you have in your component, you can render them, and it will evaluate that evaluate that variable, and it will render the output of that variable in your HTML page. So that way you can use interpolation for rendering your the variables or your custom properties inside your component in your HTML page, in that associated HTML page. In the same way, property binding is also used. It's doing the same thing. It is not doing any other things. It is also evaluating the expression. Inside property binding, we are using, instead of curly braces, we are using square brackets, and it is binding actually the properties of element as well, plus it's rendering the data also. So the major difference in the property binding and interpolation is, interpolation always deals with string. So, or in other words, I can say, whenever you are evaluating an expression using interpolation, the output which you will get is always going to be a string. And with property binding, it maintains the data type of the variable. So in this example, that what we saw is, on the first example, we have uh, first attribute column span, and there is two, 1 plus 1 is written there. So the evaluation of that 1 plus 1 will be 2, that is a number. And that property binding is taking care of the data type, and it is actually assigning the number data type to this column span. So majorly speaking, the property binding take care of the data type of the variable. Interpolation will convert all the data types into string and renders them. Every time when you are binding any property of your HTML tag, recommendation is always to use property binding instead of interpolation. Now then, we saw event binding. We completed property binding and interpolation. In that, we saw how you are passing the data from your from your TS file or your controller to your HTML page. And in event binding, now we are going to see how you can pass your data from HTML to your controller, or how you can trigger some of the events from HTML to controller when you are working. The user is going to work in front end, and its user is going to work in your devices, your websites, how they can interact, and how you can pass that interaction to your actual controller. So in for that purpose, we have used event binding. So you can see in the example, we have a click event where you have applied a handler on save button. Whenever that click event will happen, it will trigger that click event, and it will call that handler on save. So to handle that, or to enable this event binding, we are using the round brackets besides the event name, that is click. Then we saw what are iterate input and iterate output decorators. Why are we using them? How you can use them in your application? They are nothing but just the interaction between two components. Now there are two types of interactions we saw. The one interaction is inter-component, where you are passing data from your HTML to your TS file, and from TS file to your HTML. That is view and model. Now when you want to pass data between the components, so if there is a parent child relationship between the components, like app component and your home component, how you want to pass the data in between that? For that purpose, you have to use at the rate input and at the rate output decorators. This will allow you to pass data from parent to child, and from child to parent, respectively. Then we saw how you can create an custom event. So there are some events which are predefined by HTML tags, like on hover, click, key down, key up, blur, focus. All these are predefined events which are provided by browser yeah, to your HTML tag. You can also create your custom events by using a Angular provided object called event emitter. So this event emitter will provide you the functionality where you can fire your custom events, and you can trigger them or you can emit them so that anyone can listen to that. So in the example which you see right now, we have created a custom event called delete request. The syntax is the similar syntax that what we have seen here. And to trigger that event, we are using dot emit method. So whenever dot emit method is called, the in the same way when you click on a button, that click event happens. In the same way, when you want to trigger a custom event, this emitter dot emit will happen, so it will trigger that event. Then we saw directives. The directives are nothing but the manipulation of your HTML, your rendering of the HTML, or your modification of your HTML. In that way, we can say directives are used. So the in technical definition, directives handle the empowerment of HTML element. There are three kinds of directives. In that, we saw component were already there. We saw the two types of structural directives and attribute directives. In structural, they are dealing with actual structure of your HTML DOM page. It deletes the HTML, it adds the HTML, it's changing the document object model of your browser. In attribute directives, they are dealing with the behavior or appearance of your tags. So if you can see, if there is any styling which is getting applied or by you, some behavior, if there is something, let's say if there is a scenario where you want, if 35% less than 35% marks are there, and it should show on red, or if should show on green, that kind of functionality is there. In that case, you are actually changing the appearance of HTML tag, and for that purpose you have to use ng style, ng classes, or ng model, this kind of attribute directives. So that after that, whatever we studied yesterday, we saw an sample application, and whatever we used in that sample application, what was the actual the real case scenario, how you are going to implement or how you are going to use whatever we discussed till now. Now coming to the day two part. In every application now you have UI, now you have everything which by which you can take care of rendering UI in your front end. But what if you want to have an interaction with the user? So in static application, whatever data you are seeing, that is a static data, and you are just rendering that data and user can read that. But what if you have something which is dynamic, and on click of something, or on data input, or if you want the user to do something, then only you are going to do some extra work for the user. That is called the user interaction. For that purpose, what you need majorly are forms. So forms, in every application, in every business application, you are going to see this forms. What are actually forms? The forms are important element constructor are nearly every web application. They have been reimagined for a better in Angular. It is important to understand where and why forms are useful. So you do the same kind of stuff by not using forms as well. But what benefit you will get if you are using forms, that we will be seeing, and how forms are very useful, and how forms are used in mainly in business applications, that we will see. Developing forms require design skills as well as framework support for two-way data binding, change tracking, and validation and error handling. So the last point which we see, it's very important, and it is actually the framework which is giving us the benefit of all these points. The two-way data binding is provided by Angular, change tracking is provided, validations are already there, and error handling. So whatever you require or whatever you need or think of, you can have in your forms, that is already present in your forms in Angular. Now Angular provides you two types of forms. Now what you might be thinking, the forms are just like what, whenever you are into any of the application, you want to register, you are just filling out the information and that's it, you click on submit button, that the submission happened and that forms functionality is done. But there are in Angular world, or in technical aspects, when we see, there are two types of forms which Angular has divided, that is template driven form and reactive form. Simple language, I will say, what is template?
Pratik, can you unmute?
Who muted everyone? I would like, please guys, do not unmute mute everyone else. So yeah, from which point I got muted, I don't know. That was the thing. You should I saw somebody muted everyone else. That is the problem. Okay, never mind. So we'll get back. So there are two types of forms which are there in Angular, and those are template driven form and reactive form. So reactive forms are used when you have more robust, more critical logic while working, or you have some robust logic which you want to apply. And now, what do you mean by robust, and what do you mean by simple template driven? So if you have a simple form where you want to do some inputs, you want to do simple calculations, and you want to just check if the calculation is correct or not, in that case you can use template driven form. In reactive forms, or in more model driven form, there is some complicated logic which you are applying. When you're writing something, it should automatically validate the things. When some fields are filled, then only you should enable other fields. Let's say example, if you unless and until you are not selecting country, you should not get the state field. And when you are getting a state field, it should not get the other pin code related fields and all. So that kind of logic which are related to different fields, we call it as a dependent field logic. So that we can do in reactive forms. Coming to template driven forms. So how you are going to implement template driven forms in Angular? So build forms by writing templates. So what is the meaning of template? We have already seen there is a term template in components which has got template URL or something in Angular, that deals with the HTML part or the templating part of the UI part of the component. So that is template. So in forms also, build forms by writing template. That means you, in this, you are mostly are going to work, or you are mostly are going to deal with the HTML part of the framework. And then you don't have benefit of this is you don't have to do much of the logic in your controller part. You can like write your logics in template parts as well. So directly I'm going to show you how you can write that. uh, this is the simple template example. Here whatever you are seeing here, that is actually the way we are going to write the template driven form. So here you see the form tag is there. Inside that form tags you can see some couple of tags which do not get confused right now, but whatever I'm seeing here is, here you have to write this kind of template which is not going to be changed most of the time. So that's why it is a template driven, and you are writing some logics by using this template. What all things you need to do while creating a template driven form? First thing is, Angular has provided a forms module which you have to import in your modules. So when you see inside this image at the bottom, there is a import return imports. You have to import forms module which is coming from @angular slash modules, @angular slash forms. So in this you have to import that, then you will be able to get access to all the forms module or form related objects from Angular. The second thing is, which is very important, that is ng form directive. So you have seen in the example, there is something called hash form equal to ng form. This is this keyword which, when we are writing this, this is actually telling when you are passing the HTML, the Angular, I will show with the example, just one second. Okay, so when we go to the example here, you can see this is our sample application which we had yesterday used also. Right now you can see when I click on user templates, you can see this kind of form is getting rendered here. First name, last name, email, password, language, everything is coming here. This is coming from this form, this HTML template. So one second. So whatever you see here, can see this, the everything which I have written, it is in HTML. In component file, what is there in the component file of that? You can see there is nothing. It's just a form class is there, and the submit handler which I have written, this handler is going to get called when you click on the submit button here. So more or less, the way I'm telling you is, there is nothing which you have to write in your controller when you are dealing with template driven forms. It is the power of template driven forms is you are actually able to handle everything in your template itself here. So that is one of the benefit of that. and the only thing which we are writing here is submit button, which is on click. So that is how we are able to render this form here. Now where is this ng form directive comes into picture? We know that whenever we have to create a form, we have to use form tag, this the tag which is provided by html. This tag, this form tag is there. So when you write this, automatically the browser or now the Angular also knows that the functionality which is coming inside this is something related to forms, where we have to do some field things, where we have to do some events, where we have to do validations, all those stuff. But now to tell Angular that this form needs to be a template driven form, we have to specify this directive there, hash f. I am going to hash f with ng form. Whenever the parsing happens from this html, the Angular will check if in the form, if hash ng form directive is used, that means it has to trigger, or it has to tell Angular that it is going to be a template driven form, and the inner logics, whatever we are going to write inside the form, has to be template driven, or it has to be controlled using template driven functionality. Okay, what this template driven functionality, we'll see, and why it is used. But other than that, what you are seeing here is this is the major thing which we need to include for template driven form. The form directive supplements the form element with additional features. So that Angular is taking care of all the additional features when you are applying that ng form directive inside a form. It holds the controls you create for the element with an ng model directive and name attribute. So the important things now, what we saw here is, for form tag, the important entity or form, the entry was this hash f equal to ng form. This is the directive we need to use. But now for an input field, now input fields are my first name field, my last name field, like this. What is this input fields? So what is the important entities for input field is ng model directive, this ng model directive, and the name attribute. Okay, I will show directly by the example what is ng model directive. This is my ng model directive. Okay, and the second important thing is this first name. So by using these two properties, we are telling ng form or template driven form object that this is one of my input field, and whatever values you are going to write inside this input field has to be your first name, and the value it needs to store inside model dot first name. Okay, I will chunk it down in small parts. What we need to do in forms, we have a form and we need to specify names to all the fields. This is what is the second point, the name attribute, which is shown here. The second thing is we have to specify ng model property to tell Angular that whenever I'm going to write anything inside that property, it needs to store in some variable. And here we have specified that variable as anything. Just imagine that it's some kind of a variable. It's a name of the user. That's it. Nothing else. So that way, this input and all the other inputs which are there, which are really important for your application or for your form, you have to specify the same thing, name and the ng model thing. Now you have seen, you might be seeing a difference here. When I'm writing name here, I'm directly writing with the string value. Okay, we have studied there is something called property binding and there is something called interpolation. Here we are not at all using interpolation anywhere unless other than this language. Okay, and we are not using property binding anywhere inside this other than this options. Okay, now how are we binding our form fields to some variables? Because we have till now we have seen this where the areas, or this where the options we had to bind some properties, and that is why we had data binding. Here there is something which is new, which is introduced, that is called this ng model, and the property binding which is the binding type which is happening here is two-way data binding. So you can see there is a square bracket and there is a round bracket inside that. So that is the same thing which we saw in our slides, that is called two-way data binding, and that is banana in the box. That is what we call it. What is the usage of this ng model? We'll see. Okay, so we have completed it. It also has its own valid properties, which is true only if every content control is valid. Okay, so this last point, I will just going to simply explain you that whenever you are writing any form, okay, so there is one thing which is ng form here. You are creating a variable by using this hash f. Now you want to check if all the fields which I have written here in my forms are valid, then only I should enable my submit button. So if you see in the form right now, that submit button is not showing me any effect because my mandatory fields are not filled. If I'm going to type something here, it is going to get enabled. My email address is not right. I'm going to write my email address properly. Password must be of 8 characters. There is one more specification here. So I have written. Now you see the submit button has got enabled. How it is getting enabled? We have added something called disabled property binding by using this f invalid. So there are some properties which you can use forms which will tell you if the form is invalid or form is valid or not, which is the last point. There are some of the properties which will tell if my all the properties or all the input fields are valid in my form, then only my form is valid, and then I can use that valid property to do this kind of stuff where I have to enable things, I have to disable, or whatever functionality I want. So what kind of validations which are provided by Angular features? So here there is a couple of properties which are there: first time, dirty, touched, untouched, valid, invalid, and errors. Angular provides the following properties to validate the form and form controls. You have seen in my the form, there is something called this kind of things are written: has danger, has success, this first errors, and all those, this first dot dirty, first dot touch, these things there. Whenever you are dealing with template driven forms, you will get all this kind of feature validations, property validations, which you can use to validate your fields. Now what is pristine, what is dirty, touched, untouched, valid, invalid? Now with the names you can see what is valid. Simply, if my field is valid, then the valid property will be true. If I have a name field and the name of, there is no, you have not entered the name, that is invalid. So if I am entering a name, that is valid. So I'm going to get if it is valid or invalid by using this valid invalid property. There is one thing called touched untouched. So in this, what is touched untouched? Whenever you are in entering, or I'll show like this. Let's refresh this. Now here right now they all are untouched. I have not touched any of the fields. Whenever I'm going to go and focus on any of the field, that flag, that touched flag get becomes true. So now I can see initially I do not have to check all the fields unless and until I'm touching them, and the time when I touch them, after that I have to do the validation. So you can see when I'm refreshing it, when I'm going to the initial forms, I am not seeing any of the validation errors here. Still they are empty, but still I am not seeing any of the validation. The time when I go inside that, I have focused on it, I have touched that. When I go outside of that, and if it is empty, that time I am getting this error validation that last name is required. How that is getting shown? There is a logic behind that which you can see here. This is what is there. There is something called last name is required. See here, there is this properties which you have to use to show that if my error is there, if it is not, it is dirty, and if it is touch, then only show that, or else do not show it. So this kind of logic which you see here, you can write them without going inside your controller and directly write them inside your text HTML template. So this is the power you get when you're dealing with template driven forms. Likewise, you can have different kind of validations. In the same way you have seen, there are different two types of validations. If email is if image is not written, I'm going to show email is required. If email is written but the pattern is not correct, then there is something called different error, that at the rate is required, and because it is an email address. So that kind of pattern validation can also be done by using that. Same way, we have password validations. There is a minimum length validation which we are using. If password is not at all required, not at all written, we are going to show this message, which you can see here. When I'm clicking outside, password is required. Okay, now when I type something, I have typed something, I have typed 4 characters, but my functionality or my requirement is at least password should be of 8 characters. So I have to write the 8 characters to remove that error. So that way I can have this uh, minimum length requirement also, or this kind of functionality. So that way you can use this 4 6 validations for doing all that validation check on your template driven form. This is the sample that just now I have showed you. Okay, so when now we will see how the working is happening. Now you have seen I have written something to show you what is the value, actual value of your form. So at the bottom in line number 73, you can see there is something called f dot value. What is this f? Again, I'm telling you, f is nothing but this variable which we have written. If I want to change the variable name, I can go and change that variable name like this. Instead of f, I am going to write my form. Where all I have to change, I'm going to change my form here, here, and here. So I have now, instead of f, I am changing that to my form dot value. What is my form? My form is nothing but this form variable which I have taken in my HTML page. So this is that variable which I've got. What I want to check, if I'm writing anything inside my form, I should get the value. If the form is invalid, that time the submit button should be disabled. So this all 2 things I am going to show you now. When we go to the forms, you can see at the bottom here, this is a sample output of that. Right now this output is what? This is form dot value. Right now there are no values inside my form. Now the time when I start typing something on my first name, my first name, you can see the value which I'm getting from form is filled with my first name here. So whatever you are typing right now, you are getting the update of that in your actual value. So in this way you can actually check what value holds by that form at that time. In the same way, last name is there, my last name. You can see the actual values are getting updated. My email address at the rate com. My email address got updated. Password, that way my password got updated. And here I'm dealing with, these were my input fields. Here I'm dealing with language selection, which is not mandatory. So even if say I'm selecting, even if I'm not selecting, doesn't matter. I am just getting the output properly as per what I want. So this way I have got the object from the form, and now I can use this object to save or to store in backend when I'm clicking on this. So after directly clicking on this, you can call an API and you can trigger that event and send this data to your backend, and you can save it. That way your form fields are getting validated on the front end side itself. Why we are using this template driven form is we do not want, first of the first information or first important part of this is, we do not want all these kind of validations to happen in the backend. The backend stuff means, you all know about the backend stuff where something you have written in your front end side, you are calling an API, the backend is checking all that is correct or not, then it is giving you back the reply, and again you are checking, okay, that something is wrong and I have to correct that, and again I have to call an API. That way this to and fro communication is happening between your client and your server, and this is actually degrading your performance. To remove that, we can do a little bit of front end validations only, and we can just send the correct data which is required for the your server, so that it can directly save it, and it's not going to bother about if it is correct or not, or if it is validate or not. That way the performance can also be increased. So this way you have got your output from the form. You can save this output and you can directly run it, all the validations you have applied here. So the main benefit you get here is this form validations in your template driven form, which you can directly put without writing a single line of code in your controller. You just have to write everything inside your HTML page and it's done. You do not have to worry about the validations and all. Angular is taking care of all the things which you have written in your HTML file. So this way we have a template driven form, and it is here used. There is okay, till now you have any questions or any doubts, anything, how it is working, why it is, anything else which is required? Okay, so I'll move on. So now we are going to see the second type of forms which is provided by Angular. That is called reactive forms type. We have seen, for first thing is, what is reactive technique? Angular techniques for creating forms in a reactive style. In a reactive style means, first thing is, you don't know what is the structure of your form. There are some things when you are selecting, suppose when you are selecting employee, you have to get some number of fields. When you are selecting employer, you have to get n number of fields. You are selecting customer, then you should get something else. So that way you don't know if there is something which is rigid or which is specific to the form fields. So that time when you want something which should be reactive, when you are selecting something, it should happen in that way and it should create a form structure in that specific manner. For that purpose we use reactive style, that is given by Angular. So that is one of the use case where we use reactive forms. The main module which we need to require or we need to include for using reactive forms is reactive forms module. So in the same way, when we use form modules for template driven, we have to use reactive form modules for reactive forms. When you are including it, facilitate reactive styles of programming that favors explicit management of the data flowing between non-UI data model and your UI oriented form model that retains the state and value of HTML control on screen. This is a technical definition. The simplest definition which it is showing is, now when you are using reactive forms, whatever you are writing in your HTML in your front end, this part, it is actually getting synced with your with your controller part. So when we saw template driven, we are seeing there is nothing written inside your controller. But when you go and when you see your reactive forms, my reactive form has got less number of template stuff, and there is something more inside my controller stuff also. So now the second definition which is said is, now that I have a controller and I have some things inside my controller, to keep them in sync I have to write reactive form stuff. So now whenever I'm writing my first name, I'm writing first name somewhere here, I should get updated that first name somewhere inside my controller. So that way I am syncing my my UI part with my model part. That can be done by using reactive forms. Reactive forms offer the ease of use, reactive pattern testing and validations. So we have not gone till the part where we are testing anything or testing our functionality or any stuff. But in a major way, when you are dealing with reactive forms, it's very easy for you to test actually what the forms are going to do. In template driven forms you cannot do that because you don't have a functional part, it's only an HTML part, and you don't get the HTML content in your testing part. So that way the validation is more critical and more difficult. There are ways which you by which you can do, but they are very difficult. And unless and when it is rigid part, most of the time it's not getting changed so many times. So writing test cases for this is less priority than the writing test cases for reactive forms. And that is why it is more beneficial or it is more helpful when you're writing reactive forms test cases. That is one of the benefit you get. With reactive forms, you create a tree of Angular form controls object in a component class and bind them to native form control elements in your component template. There are multiple terms which has come in my last point. So we'll see slowly. With reactive forms, you create a tree of Angular form controls, creating a tree of Angular form control objects. So when I go to my actual uh, actual controls, here you can see I am creating these things. So what is this? This is actually a tree of my form controls. So there is one way to create form controls, that is this. Multiple things are there. Form control. Okay, this is one object which is provided by Angular, by which you can create form control. You have to create a form control like this. This is my form control with name. Okay, another form control with email, and another form control with password. So I have created three form controls like this. Now with the definition, what I want is I want a tree of Angular form controls in my component class. So I'm writing code in my component class right now, and I want to create and this three types of controls. Now I have there is one object inside Angular which is called form groups. So you can actually combine all these controls in your form group in this way. So here I have an object called form group like this. So what I am doing here, there are multiple things which I am doing right now. The code which I have written for you is actually the simplest way of telling you the definition of how you can create a form tree there. So this is my form group, and there are three fields which are there in my form group. Now I have to assign this form to my in my definition. I have to bind them to my native form control elements. So binding them to my native form control means, whenever we say binding, the only thing which you should take in your mind is property binding, event binding. That kind of bindings are there. Okay, so there has to be something which is binding it. So in this the difference are, when you see here, there is another form control which is here on the bottom, and this is my form. Okay, now I have to bind whatever fields I have created in my component to my template. So the first thing which I'm going to bind is my form. So this is my two forms are there. One form is there and one reactive form is there. You can see here I am binding that form by using this property, form group and reactive form. And you are seeing in the same way in template driven form there were some input properties. In the same way here we have some input properties, which is my name field, email field, and password field. There I was writing something called ng module or ng model for binding my properties to my actual form controls. Here I am going to use the form control names which I have created. So there are three form controls which I have created: name, email, and password. The names of this form control should be same names which you are going to write in this form control name. So there is something called binding inside this form. This you have to remember, or you have to work in same way. The in forms you have to bind the form by using this property interpolation, the property binding form group. And here you have to specify the name of your control which you have created inside that form group. So form group, what is my form group? This form. And what is my form control? Name, email, and password. So when I go here, I have a form control name, I have a form control email, and I have a form control password. In the same way I have created that. Now when I go moving on, what next is there? So we have created a Angular form control tree. We have created a classes inside our component class. Now we have bind our native elements to our component template. So this was our template and we have bind that. So this is actually what is required in our reactive forms. That's it. There is nothing more to the reactive forms. Now when you are writing all this, you can see in my examples, I have created user reactive forms. This was my name field, this was my email, and this was my password. Everything is similar. There are fields also, there is a submit button also. At the bottom you are seeing the output also. And you might be thinking, what is the difference here? The difference is, here we are not writing all the kind of validations, but still we can use the same kind of properties which we were using in our template driven forms. So that is one thing. And the difference other thing is, when you are creating a form variable or this form tree which is told, you can actually specify the validators here. So this will help you to do the testing of your form while writing the test cases. So by looking at this thing, what you can understand and what you can take out of this is my reactive form which is created. There are three fields. One field is called name, which initial value is empty. The validation required for that is required field. It is a required field. In the same way, when I'm going to email field, it is an empty initial value, and the validations which are required and email. The third value is like this. So that way, the same kind of validations which we did in our template driven form, we are doing here in our reactive forms. Now I can use this reactive form for my testing purpose, for my validation purpose, and everything. I do not have to worry about here whatever is happening in my template. And the main thing, or the main important part of that is this thing. One advantage of working with form control objects directly is that value and validity updates are always synchronous and under your control. What is the meaning of this first line is, whatever I am going to change in my controller, in my form, in this file, the same kind of updates are going to happen in my HTML. So in this way, the two-way data binding is happening in reactive forms. Anything which you update in your component, it is getting updated in your HTML page. Anything which you are updating in your HTML page, it is getting updated in your component. So if I'm writing my form like this, I have a reactive code like this, the form controls. Let's say, suppose I want some initial value here, that is my initial value, and I'm saving it. Now when you see in reactive forms, there is something called my initial value which has come initially on the screen. See, if I'm going to remove that, then I'm getting an error. Otherwise I'm not getting that error because the validation is happening properly. The second point is, you won't encounter the timing issue that sometimes plague a template driven form, and reactive forms can be easier for unit testing. So the second point here which says, when you are going to do some hands on and when you are going to do some work, if you are going to try your a little bit complicated form controls with template driven form, you will see that the time it takes to update is little bit less or little bit more than the time it taken by reactive forms. In simple way, if you are updating any field, it's updated, you are seeing it's updated in milliseconds, but actually it's taking more time than reactive forms. So while running the code, the codes runs in milliseconds, so you won't even imagine how fast it is running. But there in template driven, there will be a kind of a delay where your value is different and the value which the code has got is different. There can be a risk for template driven forms for writing this. So that is why we call it as synchronous. Synchronous means unless and until it is not complete, I should not get the functionality done. So in reactive forms, it is synchronous. That means if I am updating some field in my HTML or in my component, unless and until it is not completely updated, I am not going to do the further actions. But in template driven, you are updating something. If you have some kind of validations written in your template driven, they might get start and your value, your complete, your writing of your field is not yet completed, so it will give you a cliche error or something which is not proper in your in template driven case. So this is the major difference, it actually matters. And that is why most of the time the recommendations is for reactive form controls. If your business application is there and you are not required just for the registration or simple purpose, every time use the reactive forms. Okay, so what we saw here, the major API or the major properties which are provided by reactive forms are this form group. The same form group I have created in my application, in our this example, this form group. There is something called form control. There is something called group for form array and form builder. So you, when you are going to study about forms in Angular, you will see this four types of objects which are provided by reactive form. So when you are from where you are getting this, when you are including your modules, reactive form module, then time you are getting all these four objects from that class. So another way of checking that is, you see here on the top the include returns, form builder is there, form group is there, form control is there, and the fourth thing is form array when you're creating a array kind of form structure. So right, that are the four important classes you get. And the directives which you have to use in your template, that is form group and form control name. So these things which right now which I am showing, they are must, that they are the you cannot change them, you cannot modify them. You, it is provided by Angular and it is the way it is going to work, in the same way it is going to work. So you have to write form group like this is one of the directive. You have to write form control name like this is another directive for input fields and for your input properties. And in the same way there is one thing called form group name. So that is you can see when you are going to deal with the structure of forms, the hierarchy of the form controls, that time you will see form group. So those are the APIs which are provided by Angular, reactive Angular API. There are some couple of methods which are provided by forms. These are major methods which you are going to use when you are going to deal with forms in reactive in Angular. So I'm just showing the simplest methods, that is set value. So every time you have seen, whenever you want to do some set some values you need to set in your application or your form, you have to call set values. The difference in set value and patch value, they both are doing the same thing. First of all, set value do the same thing, patch value also do the same thing. In set value, the major difference is you have to provide all three properties. So in if I can show you, this dot reactive form dot set value is there. Okay, now if I have to pass the values there, name is equal to initial name set. Second is my email. I have to pass email, my email.com, .com, and the password is 12345. Let's say like this, something is my password which is in string form. So this way what I have done is I have used set value method to set the value to my reactive form. When I go and when I check here, see the values which I had set in by using that, I am getting them. The same thing can be done by using patch value. Go, same thing is there. Then what is the difference here? The difference is with patch value you can only set any one of the field also. So if I'm not setting other fields and if I'm just using patch value, still my functionality is going to work. But the same cannot be done with set value. So this is the important thing which you have to take care. Here you will see in the code, see here, must supply a value form control with name email. There, this kind of error is going to be there. And right now, if you are seeing in your HTML, if you are able to work with that, it is not going to work. Frankly, it has actually not worked, because if there are some kind of validations or something, that is not going to happen with this form. So what you see on the UI is actually not what has happened, and that is why you got this error, because you have not passed the initial values. So if I pass all the values like this, all the properties like this, and if I run that again, you will see I don't have that error coming. See, that error has not came yet. So I have passed all the values. So that is the major difference that is shown. Use the set value method to set a new value for an individual control. The set value method strictly adheres to a structure of the form group and replaces the entire value of your form control. So this is my form group. Sorry, this is my form group. It has got three properties: name, email, and password. My set value should also have these three properties: name, email, and password. The same way, patch is use the patch value method to replace any property defined in the object that has changed in the form model. So it is not provided, or it is not mandatory to pass all the fields. You can pass any of the field in that, and it is going to patch your value. There is one thing called reset form. So if you have passed this, so when I want to reset my, what I'm going to do, I'm going to this dot form reactive form dot reset. It's a simple way of calling reset. So now when I'm going to click on my submit button, it is going to reset the values. Simply I have to just remove this just to enable that. Okay, so I am here. I have this values which I had. I have just clicking on it. See, everything got reset. So when I'm clicking on this, what I'm doing, I'm actually calling a method called reset. It is going to reset all my form fields to initial value or empty value, which you can see here inside this null. Got it? So this way you have this kind of three methods which you can use in form. There is one thing called form dot invalid and valid to check if all the fields of forms are valid, making the form valid and invalid respectively. So the same thing which we are using here, which I just removed. So this is my reactive form, and this dot reactive form dot valid, this is going to tell me if all the fields inside my form are valid or not. And what if they are valid, then don't disable and don't enable, and that kind of functionality I can do. So that way those properties are getting used of form for functionality purpose. So in the same way I'm showing, this is my sample HTML template, and this is the same sample ts file for that. What example which I have showed you, you can see there is some difference here. I have same thing, form group is there, form controls are there. There are some form controls which has a address, and there is another that address is with multiple form controls. So that way you can have a hierarchy of form groups and controls in your HTML and in your ts file to deal with your any kind of forms requirement. So this way it is very very efficient and very helpful to create any kind of forms in your in your front end application. This slide we have already taken care of, and this is more important, that reactive forms are synchronous forms. Unless and until you are not completing your functionality, it is not going to move ahead with other functionality. The template driven is not that synchronous. It's going to work parallelly with all the different types of functionality, and that is the major difference while using your form or reactive form or template driven form. Okay, now we'll this is what we have discussed about. Till now we have discussed about the Angular. There are four topics which we have covered. That is the basics part, that is the components, the templating of components, and how you are going to work with the forms in Angular. There is one major topic which is left, that is routing. I would like my colleague Priya to take over and deal with that topic. She will understand, she has done a lot of work with routings, and she will be most helpful to let you guys understand what is actually routing and how it works in Angular. Okay, over to you, Priya.
Thank you, Pratik. Thank you for taking us to forms. So,
I'm going to stop sharing, you start share, right?
okay.
Are you able to share?
Yes, yes, yes. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yeah. So till now we have seen about the components, directives, and how to create forms, everything. So now we are going to see how to create a routing. So if you take any web page, we will be having different contexts. So for the different contexts, we will be having a different URL. So depending on the URL you select, we will change the content. So now we are going to see how we can achieve in Angular. So these are the topic today I'm going to cover. So we have created the components. So now we will see how to navigate to the that component. Like when you click on particular link, you wanted to load that component in the page. So the second point is whenever the URL changes are based on the URL parameter, how we can access that URL parameter and use the data in that particular component. So second thing is uh, child routing. So we may have the nested routing in any application. So basically based on the context, so we will be having some sub routes also. And fourth thing is, so like any website you go, we wanted to make sure if you are going to particular URL or if you are going to some site, you have to be authorized. So let's say if you're logging into any online course site, if you wanted to register course, you need to provide some basic details like name, email ID, and other details, so that you can proceed in the site. So if you are developing the same kind of website, so how you can achieve the same thing in Angular. And the final thing is lazy loading. So this is the main thing. So if you take any application, first load time is very important. So even let's say if you are just opening any website, we will be just wait for 2 seconds to load the site. If it is not loading in 2 seconds, you'll just move on to some other competitive sites. It could happen because like if you're loading the many files or huge number of images or different kind of scenarios are there, because of that it may take long time to load first time application. To avoid that, what we can do is we can load the very minimal thing in the first load, and remaining thing we can load on demand. So that is called lazy loading. So we will see how we can achieve the lazy loading in Angular. So now I just wanted to show you the demo app. So you can see the application. So to demonstrate the routing, I have already created some basic routing and the components. So you can see the home, course, career, all those links. So at the end of the session, we will can learn how to wire the components and rest of the things. Now I'm going back to the slide. Yeah. So how to create the routing? So we have already seen Angular CLI helps us to generate codes. So similarly, if you wanted to create routing app level, you can use engine new and the app name. Along with that, hyphen routing helps us to create routing code along with the app. If you wanted to create in the module level, so we may be creating a many feature modules. So routing also will be added to the feature level modules. So if you wanted to add the routing for the module, while creating the module you have to specify hyphen routing. So this will create the routing code for the particular module. Next, so how do we actually set up the routing in the Angular application? So first thing is, in index.html we have to mention base href equal to slash. So this actually generated by Angular CLI itself. And if you wanted to have a different URL or the domain name, so you may need to change this value. Like let's say if I'm creating the Udemy application, so you can just say the application name here. The second thing is router module. So we have to include the routing module. So you whatever this code you are seeing, this will be generated by Angular CLI when you are specifying hyphen route. So you can see here, we have just created the app routing module, and then we have included some routing. Uh, all the routing things are coming from the Angular slash route package. And if you see here, so let's say I've created the component first component, and in the URL, so like the localhost 4200 is a default URL. So after that, if you wanted to route first component like localhost 4200 slash first component, so you have to mention saying like what is the path, what is the corresponding component, and we will see detailedly in the upcoming slides about this. And one more thing what we have to mention is router outlet. So in the HTML, wherever you wanted to have this routing, that particular view, you have to mention this router outlet. So we will see detailedly about the router. So what is router? So router is nothing but a array of routers which will contain the details about the routing configuration. For example, so you will be having the what is the path and what is the corresponding component you wanted to display. And router is a singleton service, and it gives you the details of the routing and the URL information and many things which you wanted to work on. So next is the router outlet. So let's say in your app you have a header. So just after the header you wanted to have the routing. So let's say whenever you click on the about, contact, dashboard or any link, so you would have seen the remaining page will be changing. So to mention where it has to change, we will be mentioning the router outlet in the HTML part. So next is router link. So this is the which will be displayed in the URL. So you can see after the localhost 4200, whatever the value you wanted to display, so you will mention here like in the router link, you will mention what is the path. So this path will be displayed in the URL, and the correspondingly whatever the component is wired for this path will be displayed in the HTML. The next thing is router link active. So router link active is a directive which helps us to add the some styling whenever the route link is active. So definitely we wanted to highlight to the users saying like, so this is the link is active. So that gives a cue to the user, so where the user is currently. The next thing is um, how to set up the wildcard routing. So so this is mainly used like whenever any wrong URL is typed, or if any URL is not matched with the whatever we have written, we want to take us our user to the some default page. So to do that, Angular provides a way to specify the default route. Using the two asterisk, we can add which components to be loaded when there is no match in the URL. And one more thing we can do, let's say for particular path, we can redirect to some other component also, that we can achieve using redirect to. Let's say the user is not specified any URL, the sub URL, so we can say take him to the first component, so which will again go to the first component. So till now we have seen how to set up the basic routing. So I'll just take you to the app so we can see how to achieve the same thing. So I've already created the app with a few components, like first component and second component, home, and rest of the things. So now we will set up the routing for the component, I mean application. So first I'll go to the routing module. So this is already created using the Angular CLI. I have added some routes. For example, for login, which components to load. For home, I am routing the home component. So you can see here I have mentioned the whatever the route I have added, that constant I have given here. And this is the main app routing module. So this module we have to mention in app module. So you can see I have imported app routing module. So next thing is we have to mention in the component what is the link. So here I've created the navigation thing. So I've used the bootstrap for the styling purpose. So for the home, I'm redirecting to the slash home. So similarly for other links also I have mentioned here. And the main thing is, so till now you have not, if you see the app, components are not rendered. The reason is I have not included this router outlet. So let me enable this router outlet. So Angular app is running parallelly. So now you can see when I click on the home, it redirected to the home page. I'm clicking on the courses. So I have already created some courses. So you can see the list of courses. So when I'm clicking the career, it's not routing anywhere. So let me see why it is not routing to anywhere. So you can see for the career, I have added something. If I go to the routing, for the career, I have not added any component. That's why it is not going to any page. So let's say if I have not developed something, so I wanted to take user to some valid page. So let's say I'll just add some default page. So let me add this. So whenever I say the two asterisk, so whatever the URL is not matched with the this configuration, it will redirect to home page. So now I'm clicking on the career. So the page is moved to the career, but now we are seeing the home page. So this is because we are redirecting to the default page. So let's say I'll create a career page. So ng generate component careers. So I'll add one more configuration for the careers. So this is the path which will be displayed in the URL. And the next thing is the career component I'm mentioning. So I've added this. I'm just saving it. Now you can see when I go to the career, so you can see the career component here. So now we have seen how to set up the basic routing. So next what we are going to see is, so I have created the course listing page. So when I click on the page, I am displaying the course details. This is a course details page, but the thing is, so whenever I click any course, I just wanted to know the which course is selected, so that I'll gonna get it via this URL parameter. So let's see how we will get that value. Yeah. So the next thing is, so till now we have seen how we can navigate from the HTML. So using the router link, what we have mentioned in the HTML, that helped us to navigate to the specific component. So if you say if you wanted to navigate from any component, how do we do that? So for that we can use the router. So router provides two APIs. One is navigate, another one is navigate by URL. So navigate takes array of URL values and it navigate this whatever the value specified in that. And navigate by URL takes the absolute path. So let's say wherever you wanted to navigate, you have to mention exactly the same path in the navigate by URL API. In navigate, let's say if you wanted to navigate respect to the current URL, so there is an option, you can specify in this array. So when I demo the application, I'll show that. Yeah. So next thing is activated route. So activated route is a service that provides the metadata of the current active route, and it used to help get the params, query params, and other data of current route. Wherever you want the service, you just inject in that component, and you can get the all the details about the route. Route params and query params. So route param is nothing but the value passed in the URL. So there may be some information in the URL you wanted in the particular component so that you can render. So in the example what we have seen previously, so you need the selected course detail so that you can display the details of the course. To get that, we can use the activated route, and it will be having the param map and snapshot.params. It contains many other attributes. So those details you can check in Angular official documentation. The next thing is query params. So there are another way to specify the params. So whenever you are redirecting to the specific URL, you can add some data to that URL so that the receiving component can utilize that data. To access the data, you have to use activated route dot query param map. Otherwise, activated route dot snapshot dot query params. The difference between the param map and snapshot is the query param returns the observable. The snapshot will return you the all the values directly. So let's move to the application. We'll make this work. So let me go to the details page. So in details component, I am displaying all the details about the course. So I have the course details array. So from that array, I'm displaying the data. So so you can see here, I've injected the activated route. So which is coming from the Angular route. And using this parameter variable, I'm getting the ID. So if you're seeing the URL, you can see the ID is available in the URL. So you can see. So when I'm going to the different course, the ID is different. So I to get that ID, I'm using this activated route and the snapshot dot paramap. So this is the attribute I'm passed in the routing configuration. So I can show you where I mentioned this. So you can see the courses is the main URL, and then I passing this ID. So if I go to the course list component, you can see the course ID is passed along with the course. So in the route link, we can mention the URL plus what is the query parameter. So in the course details, I'm getting the course ID, and based on the course ID, the course object is populated. So now if I'm going to the particular course, you can see the details. So the same component, but using the ID, I'm able to display the details of the course. Any questions so far? Okay. So next thing is, let's say if I'm going to any particular course, or if I wanted to register some course, I need some basic details like email ID or some name details so that I can register the students to the particular course. Or you have seen any website you go, they will first ask you to log in if you are doing any transaction. So how to achieve that? So Angular providing guards interface. So these guards help us to put a checkpoint before entering into the particular URL. We can do some check, and if the user is logged in, or if they have the permission to access that URL or not, so all these validations we can do. Then we can route to the particular URL, or we can redirect them to different URL. So it, guards providing 5 different methods. First one is can activate. So this can activate method is called before every route is navigating. So when you click on any URL, first it will check whether the can activate is true or not. By default, it's true. So if you wanted to add any logic, you have to implement this can active method, and then we can add some logic there. Second is can active child. So whenever the URL is redirecting to the child route, there also we can add some validations or some check. So to do that, can active child is used. So I'll be demonstrating can active and can active child in the application. So next one is can deactivate. So this mediate the navigation away from the current route. So if you are doing some changes, whether do you want, we can add a check to whether to move to the next URL or not, whether to discard the changes in the particular changes, or if something is asynchronous thing is going on. So if any process is happening in the current URL, before navigating to the next URL, we can do the check, and if you wanted to deactivate the navigation, we can do that. Next one is resolve. So if you are loading any URL, so if that URL requires some data, or if that before even loading that URL you need specific details, so we can make sure using this resolve, we can wait until the data is loaded. After that we can load the page. Next one is can load. This help only in the feature module. So let's say you have a feature module and you're loading asynchronously, so that time we can add a one check using the can load interface. Let's see how we can achieve that in this application. Let's say you wanted to register to the particular course, so I'm clicking on the register, and here it's saying connect with I mean you have to connect so that we can register to the course. So there is a page I created for enroll. So if the user is not connected, it won't let you to register. So how to add that? So to add guard, so we can use the command line also, ng generate guard and the guard name. So I've already generated this file, so I'm not gonna run this command. So if in your application you can use this command to generate this auth card. So you can see here the auth card is implementing the can active interface and can active child and can load. So here in can active, I've added the functionality to check whether it is logged in or not. So instead of this, I can simply say true. So this is the default implementation. All the methods will be returning true by default. So let's say if it is true. So when I click on register, okay, I have the checks, so that's why it's not okay. So okay, let me go to the with the login only. So I'm adding this check login condition. So what it does is, so it will check whether it is login or not. If it is not login, it will redirect to the login page. So this method you would have seen in my pre slide may, like you can use the navigate or navigate by URL method to navigate to specific page using in the component level. And in routing, what we have to add is one more attribute called can active. So when you say can active, you have to mention which class you are referring. So here I have implemented the auth guard, so that's why I mentioned auth guard here. So I've enabled the auth guard. So now you can see when, because it's not logged in, so it's redirecting to the login. So let me go to again. So the moment I click on register, it redirect me to the login page. So I'm giving valid email ID. Now you can see the message saying you are successfully enrolled. Now I'm going back to the another course and enroll. So we have already logged in. So when the moment I click on register, it's redirecting me to the enrolled message. So let's say I'll refresh the page. So now you can see when I click on register, so the moment I refresh the page, the login details will be lost. So it is like we are not storing anywhere the login information. So that's why it's asking me again to log in. Yeah. So now we have seen how to add the authentication for any specific URL. So similarly, the next one, what we can see when I checking on the course, if I wanted to go back to the course, till now you have seen I was clicking the course button. So instead of course, we can click on the back and we can navigate to the specific URL. So we'll see what is mentioned in the back. You can see for clicking of the back, I'm calling the back function. So here I'm using the navigate by URL. So instead of navigate by URL, even I can use the navigate also. But I have to mention in the array format. So when I click on the back, it redirecting to the course. So any questions? Okay. So next I'll move on to the child routing. So this is a example what I'm gonna show in the application. So let's say we have a root app, and from the root app we have the first level routing, route 1 and route 2. So this first level of routing we have already seen. When I click on the home or career, it redirected to the specific URL. Let's say if the route having another level of routing, so we will see how to achieve this. So let's say this routing component they have child, and how to mention the child routing. So in this sample code, path and component we have already discussed. So the next parameter, next attribute is children. So in children we have to mention again this path and component. So all the parameter attributes will be same. Only thing is we just need to mention inside the children. So this second component have the two child routes, child A and child B. And in the URL, it will be displaying like localhost 4200 second component slash child A. slash child b. So in route link, we have to mention like dot slash and child a. So if you have noticed, in the first level, I have mentioned only the first component or second component. So so you see like just slash first component. So I have not mentioned a dot. The reason why I have mentioned here dot is I have to mention it's a relative. Obviously, I don't want to mention like second component slash child a. So to for easy readable purpose and code maintainability, so I mentioned relative URL, and rest of the things everything will be same. Yeah. Now we will see how we can achieve this same. So I've already created the one sample for this child. Uh, and one thing I wanted to show the visually how it is taking place. So if you see this gray color area, it is representing the first level routing. This first component and second component which displayed here, it's a second level of routing, and you can see here the routing also. The example is a first level routing and the second component is the level 2 routing. This color represent the second level of routing and how much it's actually taking in the view. So this second component have two child component, and this blue color representing the level 3 routing view. So we'll see in the code how it is represented. Yeah, you can see the example, and the example containing the children of first and second component, and the second component contains the children of children A and children B. So I'll just add one more children component saying children C. Add one more. Whatever the URL you wanted to mention, you can mention in the path. So that will be displayed in the URL. So child C component I've added. So in the second component, I have mentioned the URL link. So you can see here, I'm mentioning the child C. So it's the same as what I have mentioned here. So now you can see the another URL. So the when I click on child C, you can see the child C component here. Let's say if I'm not mentioning this dot, till now you have seen like example second component and child C. So when I click on this child B, so I've removed dot from the router link. So I'm clicking on third. So you can see child C directly. So now you will be getting the point what do you mean by relative URL. I'll just revert back this and going to the third component. Now you can see now the URL is relative, because of definitely we don't want to mention like example second component everything, but still if you mention the whole thing it will work. Instead of dot, if you mention the whole path, this also will work. So say I'm clicking this, So you can see both works. But mentioning this long URL would be tedious. So that's why we prefer the relative URL. Yeah, that's all from my side. So you can refer Angular official website and the Medium articles and others.
Yeah, thank you, Priya.
Yeah.
Guys, okay, we'll go with this slide. Can you go now? Can you go back to your first slide from routing? So, guys, we have covered all the five topics for now. So, these are the basic topics which will guide you to create your application, what all things are required, how you are creating, how your view should be, how you have to manipulate or modify your views or your user interfaces, how you can create form structure, how you can interact with the forms. Now, this routing part was majorly to cover how the navigation from one page to another is happening, how you when you see on the websites, there is a website which has got lot of critical information or lines of information, and how you have to divide that information in chunks of parts. So for that, this routing is really helpful, which will give you. And the second benefit of that routing is the time when you go to that page, that time that page is getting loaded. That is called on demand loading. So if imagine if you are in one of the website where you have home page, you have uh, Priya, can you mute?
Yeah, yeah, sorry, sorry, sorry.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, so the routing was for that purpose, where you have multiple applications or multiple pages in your application, where you have divided them with home page, career page. Inside career, you have n number of careers or some kind of example. Imagine a college website is there where there is a career page, or where is a department page where you have electrical management, you have computer engineering, and all that stuff. And each department has got its own web page. So for that, you cannot write everything in your front end. Uh, Priya, if you can unshare that, I can share and present.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay, so right now, what you see on the screen, can you see my screen first of all? Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So now what you are seeing on the screen, it is just the same example or the same application which we have built. This is without routing right now. So to enable routing for this application, what we did, the couple of changes, what we did, whatever Priya has shared just now, we just added this app routing module, which was already there. We added this couple of routers. These routers are nothing but just to tell you, or just to tell the Angular, when there is something called this kind of string on the URL, what to render on that time. So the path is what is the actual path of your web browser, and the component which you want to render on your web, that is what is this combination or association is required. The wildcard, what she said is, whenever there is some kind of invalid path is there, where to redirect that, that we have shown here. So what I tried to do when she was explaining you, I tried to convert this application, which was before without routing, to with routing. So what I had to do, you can just see on the screen, this was my old application or old HTML page which I had now. And this I was doing with the help of Bootstrap. So I had some four buttons there on the top, and on click of the one of the button, I was just rendering that content on my UI part. Now to achieve the same thing, I have done this part. I'm going to comment this thing, and I'm going to uncomment this. So I will show you what is the benefit of this also. From here, I had just removed all the code which was there at the bottom like this, and I have all this converted into that. The properties which she has told you, that is router link property is there. which is telling me when the routing, when I click on that, what should be appear on my browser URL. So if we run this, and if you see, now what happens is on top you can see there is an app has come. So when you click on that, this is showing the same page, but now it has got router. When I click on page, it is template driven form. When I click on user interactive page, it has got reactive form. The benefit of that is now you can use the browser navigation also to move back to user template page. Instead of you clicking on this, you can just move back and it will automatically load a template driven form for you. Again you click back, it is loading app form. Again you click back, it is nothing. So that way you are using the router module to use the navigation of browser which is provided by browser for navigating from one page to another. So this is the another benefit you get when you are using routers. So that those are the major benefits. You get the demand loading which I said. So now when I'm at route, when I'm using, when I'm clicking on user reactive form, the only data which has come to the browser is which is related to that user reactive form. The trials, the user template form, those HTML files or those files has not yet come on the screen. That is what is called demand loading and lazy loading concept. So whenever in the that is actually an advanced topic and we are not covering that now, but just to have a interest or just to tell you general purpose, what actually happens is whenever there is a this kind of web applications are there in your phone devices or in your less bandwidth internet connection, when you are not that much patient to load that application on your browser. So we have to, the developer has to do some kind of techniques to make it for load fast in any of the bandwidth in any of the devices. So for that purpose, this lady loading and this demand loading comes into the picture. So those are the major concepts, but they are getting used by using this routing concept here. So that way I have converted my application to simple application to a router application by using all this stuff. That way you get all the benefits of that. And other stuffs which she has told, those are activated routers, child routers and all. They are again the advanced topics which right now we are not dealing with, but they comes into picture when we are developing business applications where you want some authorization, some authentication before going to that page. Now if you are in some banking application and authorization is happening or not, those kind of stuff, this routing comes into picture and they are playing major role on that. So by this topic we are actually completing our session, today session. I would like to give some of the advices and some of the mediums or the references which you can go and from there you can learn. Yesterday I have told you guys that this is an open source thing. So open source means anybody can contribute in that, anybody can learn from anywhere, there is no restriction to that. And the best way to learn Angular is, the first website is Angular. It's a very good website, it has got a good documentation. But usually what happens is when we are actually going into the technical documentation or the Angular documentation, there is a technical difficulty to understand that the way they are explaining that it might not be useful. So for that purpose there are the couple of forums which are provided by which you can use and you can open that. A simplest way to understand this, just type um, routing in Angular. Simply type a topic, write something like this. You will get all the related documents, all the related forum or contents which are required for you to understand. There are n number of things which are there on the website. You can read and learn from there. They are giving you running examples as well, and explanation is also very good. So these are the couple of references which I mostly prefer to go and check, because they are more active also and their collaboration is very good. So they are, so medium thing is also there and codecraft is also there. So they mostly deal with all the Angular related stuff. Others are also there which you can look at on your own way. So with that we are completing our 2 day session. Thank you for joining us today. And if you have any questions right now, we are opening, you can unmute yourself and you can just ask the questions if any doubts are there. Other than that, if you don't have any doubts right now, I'm not expecting that. But if you can go and do some hands on by yourself, if you can create some application, you can check out any forum, any difficulties you have, you can check out, call us, or you can contact us via LinkedIn profile. We are active there, we are getting, you can actually post with this channel itself. There is a channel going on with this Angular essentials, so you can contact us from there also. And we will like to help you by any ways we can. Thank you for joining us, and you have a good day. Just tell me any questions you have, guys, then please carry on. Okay, so I don't think we have any questions. Okay, with this, I'll be concluding today's session. Again, thank you and be safe. Bye bye. Gone.
Yep, we can.
Wait, I'm just stopping the recording. Hmm.